I'm Fergus Younger from Old Leckie Farm.
I'm Sandra Stewart. My business is farming and conservation, and I work with farmers as a farm conservation advisor.
Old Leckie Farm is on the Carse of Stirling, on the edge of the south side of the Carse of Stirling. We have about 100 acres on the heavy clay sort of silty ground, and then goes on to the rolling sort of dry field ground for about 200 acres, which is old glacial eskers, sandstone sort of based soil. So we have quite a mix of two different types of soil, and we run a mixed livestock farm. So we have cattle and sheep and pigs and laying hens, and a very sort of diversified business. So the low ground is really used for forage production and runs a rotation of hay and red clovers and some barley cropping, and then is used for finishing lambs during the winter. And on the dry field land, it's a grazing system, usually a rotational grazing system, some zone systems, some just bigger rotational fields, and usually a leader-follower system, using lambs in the spring and early summer, and then when the lambs come off the ewes, then the ewes mop up behind the cows and calves. So the measures we've undertaken on environmental measures on Old Leckie Farm, we're very lucky that we have an old history to Old Leckie Farm, in that it was part of a bigger estate and a designed landscape. So we have a lot of really old trees and a lot of field boundaries, a lot of coppice woodland. So really quite a mixed farm. So we spend a lot of time maintaining these features, trying to maintain the standard trees, improve the hedgerows, maintain the wetlands. We try and do a lot of work for waders, fairly unsuccessfully most of the time due to predation pressures and a habitat sort of loss. And we also plant some species-rich grassland on appropriate sites.
Well, the nature value of species-rich grassland, as you can see behind here, Fergus has been busy and we created this species-rich grassland. And if you think about it, the diversity of plants and the diversity of the heights of the different vegetation means it's a fantastic habitat for a whole range of species. It's fantastic for pollinators, bees, moths, butterflies, and it's also a habitat for birds. There's lots of seeds in here, and a hibernation site in the winter, and feeding opportunities for small mammals and amphibians as well. So it has a huge amount of value for nature because it's an ideal habitat.
For me, it's an area which was quite species rich already, but it was a backlying bit facing north, quite steep, quite poor fertility-wise sort of soil. So for losing the productive value of this piece of ground to the farm, not losing completely, but losing an element of it, it was already on that margin. So it was quite a sensible place for me to try and work with Sandra to enhance the level of species in here. Yeah, so we have two different areas of species-rich grassland in this field and the field over. This one's established about 3 years ago now, and because there was quite a high weed burden and things like that, we actually burnt this area off with a glyphosate and tilled the top surface area, spun on the seed with a quad bike spinner, and rolled it in the sort of late spring, and it seemed to take quite well.
This species-rich grassland was part of the Burton Beast project, and the Burton Beast project was myself and about 6 other Scot flag farm conservation advisors were spread right across Scotland. So we put together an application to the Biodiversity Challenge Fund, and we were successful with that. It was funded by Nature Scotland, and so it funded us to work with about 60 farmers right from the borders right up to the Orkneys and Shetlands, and Fergus was one of the farmers that I worked with across the Carse. And we gave each farmer about half a hectare's worth of species-rich grassland seed, and helped them and supported them in sowing it and managing it. We also gave it all an owl box, probably 5 or 6 bird boxes.
That's right, yeah.
Small farmland bird boxes, insect hibernation box, and some a bird feeder, a small bird feeder, and a bag of wild bird seed for birds. So overall, the whole project, we had 30 hectares across Scotland planted with species-rich grassland.
the project was really helpful to me to actually understand how I could establish it, to obviously get a bag of seed, which is very expensive seed for as part of the project, and then to have Sandra to consult to actually make sure I was trying to manage it appropriately.
And so, I think we've done a good job.
Done a good job. So yeah, the previous one from this year, we didn't graze it at all in the spring, and it actually got too heavy, too bulky, too much grass coming through. So actually this one had a pretty heavy graze until the end of April, then everything came off, and we've electric fenced this section just to keep the stalk off it and allow it to flower. And I think that is better than leaving it from the start of the year without any grazing. Otherwise you get too much sort of grass biomass swamping the whole plot, really.
I think what Fergus has just explained about grazing early in the springtime, having a shut-off period, allowing it to flower, and quite a lot of it started to set seed. And then you need to graze it off. You absolutely have to graze it off or cut it and lift the cuttings, because species-rich grassland, and don't fertilise it, because they're low fertility grasslands, and that's what you want. So you lift the cuttings to reduce the fertility, or graze it off to take off the fertility. Well, there's a whole range of species here, and there's mostly the species that was, the seed mix was 85% grasses and 15% wildflowers. So we have oxeye daisy. This is the oxeye daisy here, and it's got a daisy flower, a nice open flower for lots of pollinators. We've got yarrow, which is this white one here, feathery leaves, very aromatic, especially if you rub the leaves. We've got cat's ear and autumn hawkbit. They look very similar, and that's the yellow, again a daisy-like flower here, so that's autumn hawkbit. We've got self-heal, which was apparently used for healing wounds in the past, and self-heal and red clover, these are brilliant for bumblebees. And the good thing about the self-heal and the red clover, they come probably from this time of the year and later on. We also had lady's bedstraw, which has probably been and flowered already, and that's an early pollen source for wildlife. And these are later on. And we had meadow buttercup, quite tall. It's not your nasty creeping buttercup that farmers hate. It's meadow buttercup, and it's got a little fringed leaf, not a big fat leaf like you get with a meadow buttercup, much hated by farmers. And also we've got sorrel, a good seed source for birds over the winter time as well. And we've got black knapweed, which I did find earlier on, and it's disappeared here, but the black knapweed has got a purple, and it'll flower later on. It's quite late. So it's a really big mix of different species. So it's that mix of grasses and wildflowers, and also the grasses, and the different heights and the different root systems of the plants. They can bring up minerals from the soil. So at different times of the year, the sheep may prefer, before the plants actually flower, the leaves of some of the, if you left them, they would on the sward, they would just graze it out, wouldn't they? You wouldn't get the flowering species. That's why it's good to take off the grazing.
Yeah, so I think once it's all flowered, our policy would be to let the livestock back in.
There was one species that we put in that was an annual, because we wanted that quick pollen fix, and it was cornflower, which looks absolutely amazing. It looked fantastic.
Yeah, it was just a sea of blue the first year, and which actually sort of showed you something was happening. So it was really positive. But that's just an annual, so you only get that the first year.
Or if it had been in an arable situation, it might have come up the other year. Because although we reseeded this sward, some of the birds and bees farmers did it as an undersown arable crop, although the cornflower will go from that site because it's now down as grassland and not arable anymore. Probably the one species that I want that we didn't put in, that we left out, was something called yellow rattle. And some farmers will know it as, maybe you remember it as hay rattle.
Yeah.
And it is a parasite of grasslands, and that's why, because we thought farmers might be a wee bit nervous about putting yellow rattle in. But if you want to create a meadow, if you're not quite as fantastic at management as Fergus is here, yellow rattle will parasitise grass and keep the grass suppressed. Fergus has done it with sheep very well, but the yellow rattle will do it, and You can get rid of it if you cut early, because it kind of flowers from mid-July, basically from now on. But it parasitises grass and allows the wildflowers to come away. We've come into the next field, and it's quite different to that field. It's much grassier, and we were thinking, oh gosh, there's not very much in here, but we've sat down and there's a whole host of plants in here.
I suppose I was a bit worried because we didn't graze this at all in the spring. We've just left it and kept it shut off, and I thought it was getting too swamped by the grasses dominating. But actually, once you're amongst it, you see all the spiders' webs and all the sort of insects, and it's actually quite a good habitat, and still a lot of flowering things. So yeah, I think it's okay. I think I'll probably have to cut it now and just lift it to get it out here.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because you want to keep that diversity. So the Yorkshire fog has kind of taken over in areas, but you're right, the plants that have come through are much more robust. The oxeye daisy's done quite well, but you can still, the red clover not so much, but it's coming through.
Yeah.
Everything's had to grow a bit taller to compete with the grasses.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that, you know, we've still got the diversity, but maybe this is the time to cut it.
Yeah.
You know, just in a few days or a week or so, cut it and lift the cuttings to reduce the fertility and start again next year again. But I think even having a balance of the sort of grassland that we've just seen and this one here, it's just a lot of the fields around a different type of habitat. A lot of the fields round about have been grazed quite hard, have been cut. There's not many that have been left long and to later on in the season. So that's good that we've done that.
Yeah, it's probably not even half an acre, isn't it? So it's not a massive problem to me. I can probably the weather's good, so I can cut this and make a few bales of hay off it.
Yeah.
And it should come away. But yeah, sometimes you think, oh, it's gone too far away, it's too matted, it's a problem. But actually, once you're amongst it, you think it's actually quite a good wee habitat.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. And doing it later on, once you've got all the rest of your hay done, is ideal. You know, the end of the season. The later you can do it, that's sort of better. But
yeah,
that'll work fine.
Shouldn't be too much bother.
I mean, some people use sort of green hay and then seed in. We did talk about that, using a sort of cutting it and then shaking out the cuttings of a species-rich grassland to seed somewhere else.
Yeah.
But we were saying this might just have a bit too much Yorkshire fog this year. That other field would be
potentially better.
Yeah,
yes.
but if you were going to use it for green hay to seed out somewhere else.
I suppose for me, it's just what's the lowest hassle.
Yeah, absolutely,
route, so, yeah.
absolutely. It's because you've got to manage it at the end of the day, and it's got to fit in with the rest of your farming policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's looking great.
It's been very rewarding to sow this sort of species-rich grassland on this area, because it's not an area where I wasn't getting a huge amount of production anyway. I don't think I've really lost anything, but I've gained a huge amount of insect life, a flowering area, and it's just actually quite satisfying to do.
Yeah, well, adding on from what Fergus said, that, you know, it's just a fantastic habitat. It's got diversity of species, it's got diversity of plant species and insects and a whole load of other wildlife that we've talked about. And also, we shouldn't just think about this species-rich grassland in isolation. We should think about what Fergus has talked about, the rest of his farm. You know, this is in combination with a hedge, with trees, with other habitats. And a few years ago he had his fodder crops. Now fodder crops are brilliant, so the species, the wildlife might go from here into the fodder crops. So that you've got to think about the whole year. And probably a good example is what birds need. You know, small farmland birds, they need the big three. They basically say they need a safe nesting place and breeding place in the spring. They need lots of protein through caterpillars and insects to feed their chicks once they hatch, and feeding for them for the rest of the summer. And then they need food throughout the winter. So it could be a combination of the seeds here, like the sorrel seeds, but then maybe if you've got a stubble that hasn't been sprayed with glyphosate, that's got some weed seeds, or a fodder crop that's full of insects. It's like a mini forest for a wee bird. Yeah. So it's looking at the other habitats as well, and it's a combination of thinking about all of those different habitats together. So really, kind of in conclusion, to be able to manage for wildlife and biodiversity, it's an integration of farming and wildlife. You know, you've got to be a good business person, you've got to be a productive farmer, and then you'll be good at wildlife management. So it's a combination of all three.